Good evening from the State of Kuwait. Welcome to the 7 o'clock news for Friday, the 24th of April 2015. I am Dalia Badran with the headlines for tonight. Representative of His Highness the Emir says Kuwait adopts a policy of cooperation for the prosperity of Asian and African countries. Iraqi troops in Anbar province recapture lost ground from Daesh fighters as violent attacks kill at least 7 people across Bangladesh. Baghdad ceremonies are being held in Armenia to mark the centenary of the start of mass killings of Armenians by the Ottoman Turks. And the Italian police arrests at least 18 suspects linked to Al-Qaeda group for plotting terrorist attacks in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Hello and welcome. Representative of His Highness the Emir, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, and the Minister of the State for Cabinet Affairs, Sheikh Mohammed Al-Abdullah Al-Mbarak Al-Sabah, said the State of Kuwait has adopted a policy of cooperation, backing dialogue, and pushing development efforts for the prosperity of Asian and African countries. Head of Kuwait's delegation to the Asian African Summit said this is realized through economic and investment cooperation, as well as supporting development projects in 2 continents. The summit is held in Indonesia's Bandung city. He added that the Kuwait Development Fund was established in 1961 as an economic arm to help all friendly and brotherly countries, affirming Kuwait's persistent efforts in support of countries hit by catastrophes and crises via contributions channeled through regional and international humanitarian organizations. In the meantime, Sheikh Mohammed Al-Abdullah Al-Sabah stressed Kuwait's support to the international efforts fighting terrorist groups that came to threaten the whole world, and emphasized the fact that Kuwait took part in the Saudi-led Operation Decisive Storm in Yemen, responding to an appeal by the country's legitimate government against a group that encroached upon legitimacy. On Syria, he urged the UN and the Security Council to find an urgent political solution to the humanitarian crisis in the country, noting that Kuwait has hosted 3 conferences for Syria donors over the 3 successive years in a bid to help alleviate the sufferings of the Syrian people. The acting Premier and Foreign Minister, Sheikh Sabah Al-Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, expressed gratitude and appreciation to His Highness the Emir, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, for patronizing the 8th conference of the heads of Kuwaiti diplomatic missions abroad. In a closing speech of the event, Sheikh Sabah Al-Khalid also voiced gratitude to His Highness the Crown Prince, Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, for his noble speech at the event and meeting with heads of the diplomatic missions. Moreover, Sheikh Sabah Al-Khalid extended gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Nasir Muhammad Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah for attending the conference, and voiced appreciation to His Highness Sheikh Jaber Al-Mbarak Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, the Prime Minister, and the government for their support for the Foreign Ministry and its missions abroad. The acting Premier and Foreign Minister thanked all representatives of the governmental sectors for attending the meeting and commended the efforts exerted by members of the conference's higher committee, chaired by the Foreign Undersecretary Khalid Sulaiman Al-Jarallah, that made the convention a success. The 3-day conference included numerous lectures and activities aimed at discussing international relations and diplomatic work. Israel and Gaza have exchanged rocket fire for the first time this year as Israel wrapped up its 67th Independence Day celebrations. A rocket was fired from the Gaza Strip into a regional council area overnight, and Israeli Defense Force tanks retaliated by firing on a military training camp belonging to the military wing of Hamas in the north of the Gaza Strip. No group in Gaza has claimed responsibility for the rocket attack, which struck an open area, causing no injuries. Our correspondent in Gaza, Majd al-Wahidi, has more details.
In what seems like a dangerous escalation, Israeli forces fired 3 tank shells at the northern Gaza Strip late Thursday. The Gaza-based health ministry said no injuries were documented in the shelling. Also, Israeli warships opened fire on the northern coast of Gaza Strip.
I think the Israeli escalation is an attempt to respond to the Palestinian rocket attacks on the occupied lands, as Israelis claim. But at the same time, this is not the first time. The Israeli occupation commits several violations on a daily basis.
The artillery bomb struck a site belonging to Al-Qassam Brigades, the military wing of Hamas east of Beit Hanun. Israel's military said in a statement it targeted a terrorist site in response to a rocket fired at southern Israel, which landed in an open area in the Negev Regional Council. However, no militant group in Gaza has claimed responsibility for the rocket. On the other hand, Gaza's resistance factions vote to continue their armed struggle against the state of Israel.
Netanyahu is conducting negotiations for the formation of the right-wing government. I think the escalation is a message to the Israelis and a chance to prove his military capabilities. Israel always uses its attack on Gaza to safeguard their internal interests.
The Israeli shelling is one of the most serious incidents since the ceasefire came into effect in August 2014, after the destructive war, which heaped more misery on Gazans already suffering from an 8-year-long blockade. Meanwhile, Israel authorities denied Palestinian worshippers access into the Haly Al-Aqsa Mosque to perform Friday prayers. They also closed Erez Crossing, which is considered as Gaza's main gate for patients and businessmen to leave the besieged enclave. The shelling incident has left many people wondering if this spark could lead to a massive fire. Gazans have been subject to 3 wars in less than 6 years, and analysts believe the chances of another full-blown conflict loom larger than ever before. Majd al-Wahidi, Kuwait TV, Gaza.
Thank you, Majd. Iraqi troops in Anbar province announced they have recaptured lost ground from Daesh fighters, with 250 militants being killed in the past few days by Iraqi ground troops and coalition airstrikes. According to Lieutenant General HH Amir al-Shammari, the forces were making progress and they could prevent the militants from taking full control of the province. Meanwhile, Iraqi officials said that 2 bombings, one near a marketplace and the other near a courthouse, killed 7 people and wounded dozens others across Baghdad. The attacks came as civilians displaced by the violence in the country have been trying to reach safety in Baghdad, while hundreds of people remain stuck at checkpoints and thousands more are living in tented camps. In Libya, the Fajr Libya Militia Alliance has carried out airstrikes against Daesh positions in the coastal city of Sirte. Officials said that a warplane launched several raids overnight against the sites, targeting members of the Libyan branch of the militant group. There have been sporadic clashes for about 2 months between Daesh militants and the Fajr Libya battalion, tasked by the Tripoli parliament with restoring security in the coastal city. Tehran senior nuclear negotiator Abbas Aragchit said today that nuclear talks between Iran and 6 world powers are making good but slow progress as they work towards a June 30th deadline for a final deal. Iranian state television quoted the negotiator as telling reporters in Vienna that the Europeans and Americans made good clarifications about the lifting of the sanctions, adding that drafting of the text had begun. Diplomats are negotiating to fill the gaps in an April 2nd framework agreement that would curb Iran's nuclear program, allaying Western fears it could develop an atomic bomb in return for relief from international sanctions. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif are expecting to meet next week for more nuclear talks. Thousands of people visited the Genocide Memorial in Yerevan today to mark the 100th anniversary of the mass killing of ethnic Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, an event that remains a diplomatic sore for both sides. Historians estimate that up to 1.5 million Armenians were killed by the Ottoman Turks around the time of World War I. Turkey, however, denies that the death constituted genocide, saying the toll has been inflated and that those killed were victims of civil war and unrest. Speaking at a ceremony commemorating the massacre, Armenian President Serge Sarkisyan expressed hope that recent steps to recognize the massacre as genocide will help dispel the darkness of 100 years of denial. Italian police issued arrest warrants for 18 suspected extremists, including 2 purported bodyguards for Osama bin Laden, who allegedly staged attacks in Pakistan and sought to topple the Pakistani government. Police in Sardinia said some of the suspects were responsible for numerous bloody acts of terrorism in Pakistan, including the October 2009 explosion in a market in Peshawar, in which more than 100 people died. The suspects were also being sought for financing terror movements in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Separately, police forces also searched some premises in Bergamo and arrested another suspect there. Four days after up to 900 desperate people drowned trying to reach Europe from Libya, EU leaders agreed to triple its naval search mission in the Mediterranean, restoring its funding to 120 million euros. The European Union leaders are under great pressure to react after more than 10,000 migrants were plucked from seas between Italy and Libya in a week. As the leaders met at an emergency summit to tackle the crisis, Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi said that Europe wouldn't turn its back on the hundreds of migrants drowned in the space of a few days. Among 17 proposals in the summit communique, leaders agreed to pledge the 28 nations to double their spending to save lives, increase search and rescue possibilities, and to undertake systematic efforts to identify, capture, and destroy vessels before they are used by traffickers. In Italy, some 85 migrants arrived in Catania earlier in the day after being rescued by an Italian Coast Guard ship. The migrants disembarked and were processed on land by staff from agencies including the Red Cross as well as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Save the Children, and the Italian Health Ministry. Italian officials are deeply concerned that the approaching summer with its calmer weather could bring tens of thousands more migrants to their beleaguered shores. 14 migrants were killed when they were struck by a train in a narrow gorge in Macedonia overnight, part of a growing tide of people trying to get to Western Europe via the Balkans instead of crossing the Mediterranean. Local media said the victims were among a group of around 50 migrants following the train tracks through Macedonia to Serbia, having probably crossed through Turkey and Greece en route to Hungary and the European Union's borderless Schengen zone. Macedonia's state prosecutor said it appeared that most of the group were from Somalia and Afghanistan. The Western Balkan region is witnessing a sharp rise in the number of migrants using the route to flee war, poverty, and repression in the Middle East and Africa. And finally, tonight, Eurozone finance ministers delivered a stark warning to Greece today that its government will get no more aid until it agrees to a couple economic reform plans as Athens launches closer to bankruptcy. After a tough morning of talks with the Greek finance minister, the chairman of the Euro group of finance ministers slammed the door on a request for early cash in return for partial reforms. He also said the remaining 7.2 billion euros in frozen bailout funds would no longer be available after June, and Greece creditors would not talk about longer-term funding and debt relief until Athens concluded a full interim agreement. Speaking in Riga at the meeting of the Eurozone finance ministers, European Union's top financial official said that any deal must include reforms that would allow Greece to create jobs and to allow greater justice. For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. Before we end, here's a quick reminder of today's headlines. Representative of His Highness Amir says Kuwait adopts a policy of cooperation for the prosperity of Asian and African countries. Iraqi troops in Anbar province recapture lost ground from Daesh fighters as violent attacks kill at least 7 people across. Baghdad ceremonies are being held in Armenia to mark the centenary of the start of mass killings of Armenians by the Ottoman Turks. Italian police arrests at least 18 suspects linked to Al-Qaeda group for plotting terrorist attacks in Pakistan and Afghanistan.